Learning Outcome Series number 1. The questions for today are: what are learning outcomes? Are they the same as learning objectives? And how do they relate to competencies and the Dublin descriptors? If we look at learning outcomes from different sources, from the literature, we'll find that some define learning outcomes as statements that specify what learners will know or be able to do as a result of learning activities. Others will define it as a learning outcome as a particular knowledge, skill, or behavior that a student is expected to exhibit after a period of study. Other sources in the literature will define learning outcomes as descriptions as to what a student should know, understand, or be able to do at the end of a program or module. If we look at what learning objectives are, we'll see some definitions like the following. Learning objectives are statements that describe what a learner will be able to do as a result of learning. Others will describe it as what students should know or be able to do at the end of a course that they couldn't do before. And there are some who define it as brief, specific statements of what learners will be able to achieve at the conclusion of an instructional activity. Which brings us to the point: are learning outcomes the same as learning objectives? And what we see is that in terms of definitions, they are incredibly similar, but there are differences in terms of implications. What we see is that the objectives have what they do is state the intentions of what you want to do, while the outcomes are concerned in terms of the results of what you have done. Two different ways of looking at it. In other words, basically, it's a question of, do we want a bird in the hand or do we want two in the bush? And what we're seeing is that the bird in the hand, the outcomes, the results, is worth much more than the two in the bush, which are our intentions. So if we get into the Dublin descriptors, what we see is that they have two ways of being worked with. We can work them as objectives, and we can work with them in terms of describing what we want to do, or we can work with the Dublin descriptors in terms of clarifying what we have done with students, seeing if we have really achieved what we wanted to achieve. If we look at the Dublin descriptors, they're very important in terms of understanding the differences in terms of academic work on the bachelor level, and the master's level, and the doctoral level. Very important for that. But then again, they can be utilized either for just describing what we want to do on these different levels, or we can use them to describe what should have been done, and examining the outcomes, we examining the product, the student product, to see if they really are achieving what was expected of them. Let's look at an example here. Here's one of the Dublin descriptors. Have the ability to identify and use data to formulate responses to well-defined concrete and abstract problems. We can work with this in terms of describing what we want to do, that will be the objectives, or we can work with this in terms of analyzing what's needed now to be able to examine student products to see if students are really doing this. It's another way of working with it. Here's a second example. Can communicate about their understanding, skills, and activities with peers, supervisors, and clients. Again, the Dublin descriptor can be used to clarify what we want to do, to clarify the intention, or this can be used to examine a student product to see if they are really mastering what we have expected them to master. Third example, have the learning skills to undertake further studies with some autonomy. This is something at the university where we have the intention of doing this, but if we look at The outcomes, if we look at what we have to examine to see if this is done, we get into the rubrics of this. We may find that the students are not really undergoing activities outside of the curriculum, and that students are not really working with um, their personal growth outside of the classroom environment. So what we can see then is that the Dublin descriptors can be used just to describe, or they can be used to analyze, to give clarity in terms of direction we need to go to analyze the products that the students are producing to see if they really are learning what we want them to learn. Now, what's the relationship in terms of competencies? Well, competencies will always need to be defined, and we can have objectives in terms of the activities that we want to achieve those competencies. But we also can have outcomes to clarify the products that students are making to see if they really are mastering those competencies that we want them to master. So they are related, and they can be used favorably to understand how we are working with competencies in terms of our declarated intentions and the analysis of the products that students are submitting to see if they really are demonstrating mastery. So to summarize, ours are student outcomes the same as learning objectives? They're defined very similarly, yes, but they are different in terms of one is dealing with intentions and the other is dealing with the output of what we want students to be able to do.